Right. Good afternoon, everyone. So just a couple of logistical announcements. Chairman Rice is attending a conference at the White House this afternoon, so he has an excused absence. Councilmember Navarro is joining us virtually this afternoon, and Councilmember Jawanda will be joining us virtually this afternoon, but we've been informed he can't join until 2 o'clock. We are not going to wait because we have a lot going on. So we are going to go ahead and get started today with, we have several items on the agenda. The first is discussing early childhood services, including pre-kindergarten and child care rates. Okay. Okay. Said a little bit of a fall in the audience, but everybody's okay, it seems. And so, Ms. Yao, thank you so much for helping us with this great packet. I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Could I just ask a point of clarification?
Sure.
We only have one member of the Education Committee with us right now. So while the members present can make recommendations, it won't reflect, a recommendation from the whole committee.
I think that's the best we're going to be able to do because, unfortunately,
sure,
we are where we are.
And we can
I'll leave it at that.
We can just reflect that in the council package.
Yes.
Okay. So the joint committee today is here to review fiscal year 23 budget items related to the delivery of early care and education in the county. This has been an area of major focus for the council for many years. But in recent years, there's been an acceleration of, expansion of services due to the Early Care and Education Initiative spearheaded by Councilmember Navarro, along with the county executive, as well as efforts at the state level to, put forward the blueprint for Maryland's education and investments in pre-K as well as the state child care scholarship program. So moving right to the early care and education non-departmental account, fiscal year 23 is the final year in the 4-year initiative envisioned by Councilmember Navarro and the county executive. And it's been focused on expanding, access to quality care, early care in the county. The table on page 2 of your packet shows the funding and expenditures that are proposed for 23, as well as the first 3 years of the initiative. For fiscal year 23, the executive is recommending level funding of $10,992,589 for the ECE NDA in fiscal year 23. There is projected unspent funding of $8,938,000 in fiscal year 22, which will be reappropriated to 23. That will result in total available resources of $19,931,000. Executive staff explained that the large estimated balance remaining in 22 is a result of interruptions in planned activities due to the pandemic. So there's a list of the planned expenditures in fiscal year 23 that include, one, $107,400 to develop an RFP for Community Development Financial Institution, CDFI, proposal. And after that proposal is completed, then carryover funding that has been identified for fiscal year 22 is intended to contract with the CDFI and build a fund to support child care operations. Additional amounts that are planned to be expended in the NDA include a subsidy seats pilot for $3.36 million, WPA portal development for $1.542 million, support for the child care facility at Wheaton, at the Wheaton Park and Planning Building for $1.5 million, supports for child care providers for $1.062 million, community-based Head Start for $1.050 million, one-time program support for summer 2002 programming, out of school time programming for $630,360. There is a proposal to add a family involvement center at the Caulfield Community Center for $341,600. An evaluation study for the Family Involvement Center program, $150,000. And the last item is $99,200 towards the Infants and Toddlers program. Council staff notes that this funding is responsive to requests made to the Council by the Commission on People with Disabilities and MoCo Better Beginnings, which is a coalition of advocates for people with developmental disabilities. And the amount will improve the rate at which children with developmental disabilities are screened and receive early intervention services. There's testimony in your packet at circles 32 to 43 that describe the request from advocates. So with all of that, Council staff does recommend approval of the funding for the NDA as proposed by the executive.
So I'm going to defer to our colleague and friend, Councilmember Navarro, who I remember vividly called me in her office 3 years ago with the framework for what we are discussing today. And I know she has been on the record many times expressing her appreciation to the executive branch for the rollout and the work and the collaboration and the partnership and getting us where we are. So I will yield to her to make some opening comments, and then I do have a couple of questions. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You said it very well. This is a really important moment and a very gratifying moment to see that we have a vibrant and cohesive early care education initiative. The purpose of the 4-year action plan was to get us started and to have some metrics and to really begin to address a lot of the different components that have been studied and have been proven to be able to push forward a successful early care and education framework. It wasn't meant to be the end, of course, but just really the beginning. And I must say that it is wonderful to reflect on the fact that this collaboration has been so authentic, and that everyone rolled up their sleeves, even when there were issues where we disagreed. Ultimately, everybody came together, especially around the culmination of the coordinating entity, which was really the last piece of this particular initiative of these 4 years to lay out the foundation. So I'm very pleased that we are where we are. I did want to learn a little bit more about the Wheaton Child Care Center. This is one of those that I know has gone through a little bit of some bumps in the road. We were very strategic when the Wheaton redevelopment project was being sort of worked through and all the components, et cetera, were being decided. We were very strategic in making sure that we included space for childcare. And knowing, of course, that this is an area of the county that could really use that type of enhancement, but it still has not come to fruition. So that was the one piece in this particular part that I just wanted to hear a little bit more about where we are. I'm pleased to see that there is funding included. It's something that I advocated for. I just want to know if there are any timelines and any particular conversations with folks that might be interested. I know my office has received inquiries in the past, but just wanted to get a little bit of an update on that particular component.
Ms.
So good morning. Yes, I think Ms. Otero will take it.
Is this on or?
There you go. Thank you very much. Yes, good afternoon. And Councilmember Navarro, in terms of Wheaton, you know, it's been a slow process, but we've been on it. And one of the things that I want to say Parks and Planning has been a good partner in the sense that they have brought us in throughout the whole process since the first time that they tried to do the RFP that was put out, I think, I want to say maybe 18 or 19. The pandemic really slowed things down because obviously there was no way that we could expect any child development center or owner to go after a new facility when, in fact, part of the period during the pandemic, we were closed. Where we are now is that Parks and Planning, I believe, has done has gotten some numbers in regards to what the build-out will be, because right now it requires a build-out in order for a child development center to be there. One of the feedback that I know they received from operators was the ability to fund a build-out, and how difficult that is because many providers can't go to the open market and get a loan to do that kind of build-out. So between I believe Parks and Planning has $500,000. We have $1.5 million, including startup costs and the building of a playground, which are all the things that need to be in place in order for it to be licensed. We have worked with them on the RFP, and I think we are sort of in the final throes of the RFP. The MOU to transfer the dollars to Parks and Planning, I believe, is now in with our legal department. So there is movement. It's not as fast as we would all like, and I know Parks and Planning is planning a session with providers who may be interested in the near future. So that's where we stand, and we have. Now that we are where we are, we felt it was the right time to put the dollars aside for that project.
Thank you, Ms. Otero. Thank you so much for that. Again, this is such a really important asset to that community. We know that there are not a lot of centers in that area. I know the demand is high. As you stated, of course, the pandemic did slow things down considerably, but no doubt that the funds to do the build out, I think, is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And because it is so aligned with our goals of the Early Care and Education Initiative, I thought it would be prudent for us to put that money on the table and address that piece so that time does not continue to go by without that asset. So I can't wait to see the results, and I know that the community will definitely appreciate all the work. Yes.
If I may add one more thing, we are going to put in the RFP and our MOU with Parks and Planning that there is a provision for a significant number of the children to be subsidy eligible. And as part of that, we're going to work with whoever is the provider to do sort of, let me call this a subsidy package, but a way to make sure that we facilitate the subsidy so that it's not all on the provider to do the billing and all of that. So we're working on a model that will help ensure that that provider can get low-income families that are subsidy eligible into that site. So depending on how the licensing comes up in terms of how many children the site is licensed for, which will be determined by the ages of the children to be served, up to 50% of the children should be eligible for subsidy, which will be a first in the county, by the way.
Yes, a first, and hopefully a model.
Yep.
That is definitely something that this joint committee has discussed for a long time. How can we leverage our own public facilities whenever possible to do co-locations and to do exactly that, to be able to have a big percentage that goes to subsidies, and to make sure that we have mixed income opportunities as well. And I think that this will definitely be a model that we can scale up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. To follow up on that, and that does sound like progress, and I really want to thank Councilmember Navarro's push for it, because it is going to be such a asset. It's so perfectly located. And the amazing Barbara Ebel gave me the tour of the WorkSource Montgomery facility that's just about a block and a half away. And we had mentioned in the last briefing exploring the possibility that on weekends we may be able to forge a partnership with WorkSource to provide, because one of the big barriers to participating in workforce training is access to childcare, even for those 2, 3, 4 hours that you are receiving some level of training or consultation in order to be able to find a job. And with how close both facilities are to each other, as we get closer to an implementation date, wanting to make sure this doesn't do anything to delay it in any ways, but maybe a year in, once the dust has settled, literally, we should explore seeing what we can do on weekends in particular to creatively even more maximize the use of that really special and important space.
Sure.
I want to extend my deepest appreciation to the administration and the county executive for placing the funds for the MoCo Better Beginnings initiative. This is near and dear to my heart, as it is, I'm sure, to all of you as well as my colleagues. But in particular, I want to thank Larry Bram, Abner Shapiro, and Dr. Seth Gordon from the Commission for People with Disabilities that have been advocating for this for years. This is a modest investment that will go so far in helping to identify earlier on cases that we know with an earlier detection, we can do so much more to support the quality in life, not just of the child who would, receive this particular service, but their families and us as a community, because the earlier we can detect people who are on the spectrum, the earlier they're put in the best possible position to contribute to our community economically and artistically and in so many different ways. So I just, one last time, want to thank you for putting that in, because that probably would have appeared on the reconciliation list had it not gone in, and you saved us from having to take that step. So I appreciate that. Last question for me is, obviously recruitment and retention remains a huge issue in this sector in particular, and each one of these investments builds off of previous successes and strengthens our foundation even further to put us in a better position to recruit and retain. But can you talk more broadly about some of the strategies that we're going to undertake beyond just this fiscal year and going into future fiscal years to see what more we can do, or is there more that we can do to find the workforce necessary for us to be able to support these children, youth, and families and our economy?
So there's two issues on the recruitment and retention. There's three, in fact. There is recruitment and retention of providers, which is the huge piece, which is really dependent on a number of costs. Real estate being one of them. Certainly finding adequate staffing is another. And to be honest, just the impact of the pandemic and their ability to be sustainable. There's recruitment and retention of families into programs, because one, cost, the issue of cost, the changing work schedules of families and what families' needs are in terms of childcare is another pretty significant piece of recruitment and retention. Obviously, staff. There's the one thing across the country, and I would say this is something we need to be worried about, looking at ahead, and we have some partners in the region that are already working on this, is we've got to move on salaries. Recruitment and retention for the teacher corps in terms of the early care and education educators, salaries are very low. They're not at a par with public education in any way, and very often you have teachers with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, but they're not necessarily making what their peers are making. And so I think providers do the best they can, but aside from some of what we've talked about, access, affordability, and sustainability, we've got to talk about teacher parity, pay parity, and we've got to talk about ways in which we can enhance that beyond stipends, but actually really go to what salary and benefits expansion is. The blueprint begins to touch on that for pre-K with some real concerns, because it includes having to be teacher certified, and so that makes it much harder for for existing staff who may have a bachelor's degree but not a degree that is a vehicle towards getting certification. And so there are still a lot of obstacles. I know that they have answered your question about what are we doing, but those are the things we've identified, and we know are issues, and this is a national issue. It's not, it's certainly not unique to us. And the more disparity there is between public education now with the blueprint, the greater loss we'll see in terms of highly qualified teachers and high quality for our youngest children, and subsequently for our most in need children. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's really where we are.
I appreciate that. I guess as we've done with several other discussions, either whether it be joint committee sessions with Education and Culture or just HHS, Ms. Yao, I'd love to revisit this post-budget to give the administration a chance to catch their breath, this summer. And I know you're thinking about this day and night, and certainly the provider community is. And I think a discussion on suggestions, ideas. I know there are a couple of seminars at the National Association of Counties on this issue this coming summer, which I was going to try to go to, but I don't think I'm going to be able to pull it off. But I do think I'd love to have a broader conversation. And also, again, outside of the context of the budget, what can we do to take advantage of this transition in governorship and transition in we're going to have a potentially majority new council. How do we set up the next council to succeed in making this a priority, as it has been under Councilmember Novato's leadership for so long? Councilmember Glass and I are going to carry the mantle forward, be rest assured of that. But I would love to hear from you all what that might look like, and maybe even some asks. Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate the way you ended your comments by looking towards the future, and that's what I just wanted to chime in on a little bit more, in that the leadership and the time and the resources that have gotten us to this place have been tremendous, and applaud everybody from colleagues who are here and folks who have participated in this process who are not in county government or in the nonprofit sector. But Ms. Otero, when you were talking about all the pressures, national pressures, correctly noting, how do you think, if you want to look into the crystal ball, all the work that we've done and the resources we've put into this budget with the future outlooks included, that juxtaposed to the inflationary pressures, the parity issues which still need to be addressed, what do you think we need to do either in the short term or be prepared for in the long term to make this succeed?
So a couple of things that are in this budget, right? Mm-hmm. One of those is having this facilities fund, the CDFI piece that is being proposed. Because one of the areas that we want to be able to give providers an opportunity to is to expand the number of children that they're able to serve if they have the facilities to do that and the ability to do that, or to reconfigure existing spaces to what is the most beneficial for the services that they're providing. That then allows for, like in any other business, more revenue and the ability to be able to by serving more children. So I think our facilities fund is a really good step in terms of supporting sustainability for providers. And that's where providers are right now. They're really in a sustainability mode. How do we stay afloat? Because they haven't yet reached enrollment to pre-pandemic days. And so I think that's a really critical piece. The second is our ability to increase our subsidies and to make it easier to access subsidies. Part of the reason we're not getting enough folks or providers to take up subsidies, or parents, it's a complicated process. It's complex. As a provider, you have to carry basically families for a month before you get reimbursed and you get paid. So if we can facilitate that, and that's what the pilots that here is, if we can facilitate payment up front, or at least based on enrollment and not attendance, again, it's a sustainability piece, right? Being able to make sure that we're providing that. So those are some of the pieces that need to be in place so that providers can begin to even think about the next step, which is how do they support their teachers. Increased subsidy payments, anywhere between 80 and 86% of your costs in childcare are your staff, your teachers. So as we increase subsidy payments, we encourage more providers to take subsidies, we help stabilize some of their funding also, so that it's not all on the backs of parents.
I appreciate that, and think also that when you reference the pandemic and how we still haven't come out of the pandemic in terms of enrollment numbers, which is the case in lots of different industries and sectors, I think that one of the things that we need to be mindful of, and I've shared this numerous times, one of the lessons learned during the pandemic is that we revised our systems. We changed our policies, our procurement, our other ways of providing grants and contracts. And if what you have identified is that we sometimes have to front load these systems in order to make them successful, we learned that we had to do that during the pandemic. And that is one of the lessons we need to continue adhering to. That the old ways of doing business might not be suitable for the new ways we need to operate. So I appreciate you elevating that, and like Council President said, look forward to holding the mantle that Councilwoman Navarro has held so ably, steadily, and high during her term to make sure that we expand access and reach parity as well. So thank you for your work.
Councilmember Glass, just a quick note. Raymond Kroll, Director of HHS for the record. Just a note on two things. One is that in terms of the ongoing conversations around this, the early child care work is part of our Recovery 2.0 planning. As a process that will bring together both our providers and key stakeholders at council staff and others to talk about, one, the lessons that we learned, two, what do we need to do going forward, what do we do to bring move providers from sustainability to viability in a new environment that still has COVID operating in it. And a piece of that from our perspective that we're working on now is how do we help them to keep their children safe and keep their staff safe in this environment until we can create the spaces that are needed to get them back to full occupancy and full operation.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Navarro?
Thank you. So as you, Mr. President, were inquiring about the issue of staffing, most certainly this should be a very important and urgent conversation after a budget. I have been reading articles that are coming out from economists describing the fact that because there has been such a slowing down of immigration, for example, writ large, the issues around staffing, as we know right now, there are a lot of challenges with finding staff. They're beginning to point to that particular element. And so connecting that thought to the demographics of the childcare workforce, it's an interesting issue to really think through. Also, as Ms. Otero was describing, the pieces around compensation benefits and then the requirements of education for childcare providers as we try to seek quality. Sometimes that works against finding then qualified staffing because, of course, if you have a bachelor's degree, let's say that perhaps you're bilingual, et cetera, are you going to choose to work in this particular industry when the pay is low and benefits are low? We're seeing within our own administration the challenges that we have finding and filling these vacancies. And so this definitely, I think, should be something that we all are going to have to work together. Obviously, the state is playing an important role, but no doubt that it needs to be on the national agenda. As long as I've been working on this issue, it always comes down to that conversation of, whose responsibility is it? And because of the way that we have structured our systems, it always goes back to the individual. However, that is just not working because the costs are so high, and other countries around the world have a different approach to this, and so this will continue to be a major challenge. But you're right in asking this question. I think at this particular moment, though, my worry is that it's going to be exacerbated because of the overall shortages that are out there with not being able to find workers in this particular industry, looking at the demographics of who they are and this slowdown in immigration because of the policies by certain administrations. That's going to become even more of a challenge, I think, for us. But, the good news is that, again, this particular initiative really does cover most of the important components where we can make a difference. And that we're going to have to continue to work together to address the issue of qualified staff. And I'll just, close by saying that it was such a surprise to think that this is by far the most important job ever. I mean, you are literally in charge of the first 5 years where brain development is just happening at such a rapid pace that determines things like school readiness and everything like that. And it's just so weird how our priorities are really upside down when it comes to really truly making this part of an extension of our K through 12 education system versus, nickel and diming it. And no wonder we don't get the results that we want. So this is a huge piece, but I think now that we have this initiative established and it's working so well, perhaps this could be something that we can roll up our sleeves collectively and begin to figure out how do we do, a lot more advocacy, especially at the national level to the federal level, for resources to be attributed.
Thank you. So, Ms. Yao, I think without objection, those members of both committees who are present support your recommendations.
Okay, terrific. The next item is child care subsidies. For fiscal year 23, the executive is recommending a total of $3.3 million and 7.5 FTEs for that program in children, youth, and families. It's a decrease of $114,765, or 3.3% below the fiscal year 22 level. Those are reflected as multi-program adjustments. The actual level of subsidy amounts available is level with fiscal year 22 at $2,676,588. And the table on page 3 of your packet shows the budgets as well as expenditures for child care subsidies from fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 23. Council staff just wanted to note that, changes at the state level in terms of increased funding has allowed for the state scholarship program, it's allowed them to increase the ceiling for income eligibility for state subsidies, as well as increase the subsidy rates. And that has then impacted how we've used funding as the county. I think the first year, almost all of our WPA clients ended up being transferred over to the state subsidy. So at that point, we were doing mostly a subsidy program to the state program with our WPA funds. But since then, we've been able to increase, again, our ceiling for eligibility as well as increase our subsidy rates. And just as an example, as of November 2021, we are now at 425 of the federal poverty level, with plans to increase to 450% in fiscal year 23. So those have been really positive steps in this area, at least. And council staff recommends approval of the proposed funding for this program.
I don't see any questions or comments from colleagues, and my understanding is Councilmember Jawando has joined us virtually as well.
Oh, good.
So I believe without objection then.
Terrific.
And in fact, I was for the last item too. I don't know if we can show. Oh, there it goes. They got me. Hello,
That's great. Okay, so the next item is early childhood services. For this program in fiscal year 23, the executive recommends $12,293,572 and 45.83 FTEs, which is an increase of $1,017,610 or 9.9%, and 3 FTEs above the fiscal year 22 budget. There are 2 adjustments. One is multi-program adjustments for $902,040, as well as a position added to administer the contract and coordinate activities with the new early care and education coordinating entity that council had approved legislation for this past earlier this year. The total amount for this position is $115,570. Council staff recommends approval of these adjustments. We're going to be talking about the coordinating entity in just a minute. So the committee members will have a chance to have a bit more discussion about it.
I think without objection.
Okay. So moving on to the early childhood coordinating entity and the Children's Opportunity Fund. As the council members are aware, the council approved Bill 4221 on February 15th of this year and requires the council to designate by resolution approved by the executive a nonprofit corporation to serve as the county's early care and education coordinating entity. And it also establishes guidelines and duties for that entity. That work is in process. I understand that executive staff is working closely with MMF to put things in place and get that entity up and running. MMF Montgomery Moving Forward has requested some funding to support their efforts in collaborating with the county, and that request is attached in your packet at Circle 46. At Circles 44 to 45. Council staff understands that the council president had reached out to the chief administrative officer to request that fiscal year 22 funding of $25,000 be somehow, be found in the county's budget, and that there would be a request to place $35,000 for fiscal year 23 on the reconciliation list for MMF.
Yeah, so background and context is pretty straightforward. We all agree that this is an important transition and we have to get it right from the outset. And we all have agreed on the record and expressing our deepest appreciation to Montgomery Moving Forward and the advocates that have gotten us here. And I once again want to express my appreciation to the executive branch for your partnership, your alliance, and the way that we've been, I think, rowing in the same direction. But there's only so much you can absorb with existing, administrative support. And so I did, as we have in other categories, during this budget process in particular, check to see if it would be possible for the administration to be able to absorb these expenses without us having to put in a direct line item, because I would imagine there's interest among my colleagues and I in doing so if we have to, but we'd obviously prefer not to if we don't have to. So I do understand that we are looking at the feasibility of that, which I appreciate. Again, I know money doesn't just fall from the sky, but I also do know, having run budgets for 12 years, that at the end of each fiscal year, there often are some opportunities to make some adjustments in the end. And I think that would be very well received for a lot of different reasons in ensuring that we've got some administrative capacity. So I don't know if one of you is in a position to respond on behalf of the administration in terms of, allaying some of the concerns among those that are watching, that there is absolutely a diligent effort in place and we're going to get this funded somehow. But if you'd like to speak to that, Dr. Kroll, in some way, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, good afternoon. I don't know that I have an answer for the group that is a solid affirmative answer, except to say that we're aware of the request and have been looking at it and talking a little bit with MMF about what the scope would be, what exactly they would be doing, and how we might jointly find a way to fund some of that. So I've not yet had a chance to confer with the folks at OMB about options. So, but we are working on it, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Did the committee want to weigh in on the fiscal year 23 recommendation?
Well, the staff recommendation, Ms. Yao, could you articulate that again?
Well, again, my understanding was that there was interest from at least some of the members to place $35,000 on the reconciliation list for MMF for fiscal year 23.
I feel comfortable with that, but pending the executive branch's ability to be able to identify the funding source. So maybe to be safe, let's put it on. That would be my suggestion to colleagues, but let's hope that there's another way that we can fund it. And between now and several weeks from now, when we completely reconcile the budget, hopefully we'll have good news. Does that sound okay, colleagues? Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. Just as an update, though, council staff understands that the Children's Opportunity Fund Steering Committee has filed articles of incorporation with the state for a new Montgomery County Children's Opportunity Alliance. county executive staff has been working with MMF on the board selection process, which is on track to transmit board recommendations from the county executive to the council in mid-June. So those are processes that are, in process.
Yeah, and let me just say, I actually physically held the Articles of Incorporation, and you could do some exercises with it. They're pretty heavy, but it represents tremendous progress and a lot of hard work. So I really appreciate it.
Okay, so then moving on to fiscal year 23 funding for the Children's Opportunity Fund and also the coordinating entity. The table on page 8 of your packet shows the fiscal year 22 and recommended fiscal year 23 public agency funding for the Children's Opportunity Fund. The recommended level of funding between the two agencies totals $834,451 for fiscal year 23, and that's approximately an $80,000 increase from the fiscal year 22 level. Council staff understands that $50,000 of that in the CO of NDA was targeted for Imagination Library, which was included as a match for state funding. Council staff did want to highlight that Children's Opportunity Fund, their grant-making cycle is later than later in the year. So I understand that they will be using fiscal year 22 funds, and they will be awarding that in June. So the funding that takes place pretty much goes through the next fiscal year for delivering service. The transition to COF from its current role as a program within the Greater Washington Community Foundation to this early care and education coordinating entity creates some complexities in terms of budgeting because of this transition. And council staff wanted to point out some of the complications in coming up with the budget for this organization as the executive and the organization, and MMF work on transitioning. So the core functions of COF are going to be in flux during fiscal year 23. Currently, they do a lot of planning and investing in grants to nonprofit organizations to deliver youth services. But when they transition to be the coordinating entity, they will be doing a lot more systems work, advocacy, convening stakeholders, evaluation, et cetera. And so their functions change pretty significantly when that happens. The current budget covers the amount estimated by MMF and OMB to stand up this entity. And it includes approximately $300,000 to $340,000 above that amount for other priorities, potentially including grant making. But it's not clear at this point what level of grant making this coordinating entity will be engaging in. So right now, they do grants to a number of important out-of-school time activities, et cetera. But there's only a few of their grants that reach the 0 to 5 population, which is the primary focus of the coordinating entity. So one of the questions is, at what level they will be doing grant making and what happens with those important services, who can take them on, what will happen with, what's the role of the Greater Washington Community Foundation and all of that. And that's actually one of the questions that the county attorney's office is looking into. Can they transfer their responsibilities right now, which, the county is directly contracting with the Greater Washington Community Foundation for these services. COF is not a legal entity. And I think those questions are not necessarily clear at this point. The last question that is also, again, complicating matters is what organization can manage public funding to help stand up this coordinating entity? So right now, again, the program COF sits in the Community Foundation. The Community Foundation gets funding, and it's a different way they get it than most other organizations. they get upfront money that's considered a grant that they consider as a donation. And this is different because the Children's Opportunity Fund is mostly like a pass-through organization for grant funding. And they also do their own fundraising efforts. When the coordinating entity stands up, again, the vehicle for contract with the organization may not be appropriate the way that it currently stands. And it's clear that, well, up until this point, Greater Washington Community Foundation has not been willing or able to enter into a fee-for-service contract with the county. So if this isn't the appropriate, if they can't do the appropriate legal instrument, then the question is who or what other organization might be better situated to support standing the coordinating entity up. And, it could be nonprofit Montgomery or perhaps Collaboration Council. There's other candidates out there. I think that the goal is to kind of give some leeway to the executive to kind of figure out these questions, moving into fiscal year 23. And so council staff, because of these kind of complications, recommends approval of the amount that the executive has recommended for COF, but because of these unanswered questions, council staff recommends editing the language in the operating budget, particularly for the Children's Opportunity Fund NDA, as well as the funding in the Children, Youth, and Family Services budget, to provide greater flexibility to respond to these issues, as opposed to kind of what the language is right now. There will be time then, because, in trying to figure out the issues as far as, level of funding and who should be doing after out-of-school time funding, et cetera, we'll have time during this current fiscal year to answer some of those questions. And if it turns out that, maybe there needs to be additional funding to support the organization, there is time during this fiscal year to come back to council. So as a result, council is also recommending that we condition the release of funds on a report from the executive that reports to the council on disseminating the funding in terms of, the organization that we're contracting with, the type of contractual arrangement, the amounts of the contract, and the description of services provided.
Okay, so let me take a few steps back. First, thank you. I understand there are complications. We're in the midst of a transition of organizations. I mean, we knew there were going to be complications. There always are. And I've been through several of these myself on the ground, on the executive side, as we've transitioned to several organizations. None of these questions that you've posed, Ms. Yao, with the exception of the grant making, which in part was because they pivoted quickly in the midst of the pandemic to address needs that were on the ground. So, but none of what you've described is unusual. And we had robust discussions about particular possible entities that were out there, and this council was very clear that with all of that information, we still felt strongly, knowing there would be the need for a transition, that the Children's Opportunity Fund was the appropriate organization and entity, and one that we had already established, had an infrastructure, and is working really hard, I know for a fact, as you all do as well, in ensuring that this transition happens. And so going back and opening the door, even if it's ever so slightly, to undo or potentially undo or change or adjust, if I'm hearing you correctly, in identifying a different agency. I mean, maybe I didn't hear you correctly.
No.
Okay.
I'm just talking about the organization that's acting as the Children's Opportunity fiscal sponsor before it gets up and running.
Okay.
So basically, Greater Washington Community Foundation is in that role right now. But how it contracts with the county is through a vehicle that may not be appropriate in terms of standing up the coordinating entity. And that's why it makes it complicated. I think that the executive and Greater Washington Community Foundation will have discussions. And it may be that maybe they can do it, which case they can stay the
I see.
fiscal. Yeah.
Okay. I feel better.
Okay. Sorry.
But I am sort of processing what entity that may be, and I understand the concern. I guess the only question I would have is, I mean, I'd like to get guidance from the executive branch here. You know, I understand from Ms. Yao's description, but I'd like to hear in your own words what you think some potential solutions or options may be. And I know you're thinking about them in real time yourselves, but as we work through this transition, you know, would love to hear a little bit more about what your perspective is. And I know Councilmember Navarro's in the queue, and I'll go to her after your comments, Dr. Kroll.
Thank you, Council President Alvarez. Just a couple of clarifications. What Ms. Yao is discussing is who will act as the fiscal agent for the Children's Opportunity Alliance once they're established, until they've completed their 501c3 process and are then able to directly receive funding. So it doesn't change anything that has been decided about using the Children's Opportunity, this new organization. Just for the record, to clarify, there was no organization called Children's Opportunity Fund.
Right.
It was a program within the Community Foundation that we're now transitioning. I understand they have done their incorporation, but the articles of incorporation that you've seen, but now it's this next piece that has to happen. And
How many months are we talking about? The delta is just, it sounds like 3, 4, maybe 6.
I don't know how many months it could be.
501c3 can be up to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. 501c3 can be, it really depends on the backlog at the IRS, because it's an IRS designation, or if they have any questions or any concerns. So it could be probably 6 months from filing. That they'll need a fiscal agent.
Yeah, that piece of this is a glitch that won't stop the Children's Opportunity Alliance from moving forward and doing its work. It's just a matter of how the funding flows through. And the one question that has to get answered is whether or not the Children's Opportunity Fund can do a contract in a way that's necessary for this new entity, or if we have to find a different agent, different organization to serve as the fiscal agent. And it's those recommendations that you heard from Ms. Yao as some of the options that might be on the table.
Okay. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. So I think that at least I understood that this was going to be part of the process, right? Because what we're doing is that we are literally evolving a program into now a coordinating entity, if you will. And so I'm glad to hear, Ms. Yao, that our attorneys are looking into what would be the most efficient way to make this transition. I do think that, you know, organizations like the Collaboration Council would be a great fit in terms of being able to continue some of the youth programs that the Children Opportunity Fund has been providing or have helped to facilitate the implementation of that here in the county, while they can then pivot into the early care and education space significant, especially because before that was not part of the main focus of the Children Opportunity Fund. So I think this is very much the natural process of the transition. And I think as long as we can find, I'm concerned about making sure we don't have interruptions in the programs that were already being, implemented, that we find a home for that. And again, we have organizations, like I said, like the Collaboration Council, and then we can, set up as a new 501c3, this coordinating entity to then be very much focusing on the early care and education piece. So I'm not as concerned as the president was, because I just assumed that this was going to be part of that process. It is always a bit interesting when you're doing that, but I think all in all, we have provided the framework that is necessary, and I think it will be very successful. So thank you, and keep us posted, of course.
Thank you. Council Vice President Glass.
Really good conversation about our partners, who they are, how they all operate, and clearly there are different structures within. But with regard to the Greater Washington Community Foundation, So they are essentially the pass-through entity that helps fund this. And while Ms. Yao, you said that they do not want or have not engaged in a fee-for-service, because clearly that's not their model, understandably, then am I correct in assuming that they do take a portion for administrative costs, much like other organizations would? Okay, so they are still being compensated for the work that they're doing, which is important to recognize as we move forward, right? Because if we stand up some other organization or go to another an existing organization, they're still going to collect that administrative fee.
I see that Kimberly Rusnak she's joining us virtually, and I believe she has her hand up. So I don't know if you would like to hear from her.
Sure, absolutely. I'm flipping back. Yeah, Ms. Rusnak.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And I just want to start by applauding the County Council and MMF and other stakeholders for standing up this entity and passing this bill and really focusing on systems building. I know when I came and started with the Children's Opportunity Fund 3 or 4 years ago, we at the Children's Opportunity Fund started talking about how do we transition our grant making to really be thinking about systems building at the same time. And I really do believe that grant making is a tool in a toolbox in terms of helping to think about systems building. And so as we have had conversations with our steering committee for the Children's Opportunity Fund, they very much would like to continue the work we're doing around grant making because they do see it as a tool for systems building, innovation, incubation, and for really pushing for change. For example, one of our grantees that is in the 0 to 5 space is Imagination Library, and really helping them to get some seed funding to think about scaling an evidence-informed program, having conversations with multiple stakeholders in our community, as well as many of you council members around how do we expand and scale this and grow this, and building partnerships with the public libraries and other entities so that it could build into a countywide program. So I do see grant making as a potential tool that we could continue to implement. But we have not, historically, Children's Opportunity Fund has not been funded with the capacity to convene, advocate, and a lot of the other pieces that are included in this new legislation, which we're really excited to be able to take that on. Because we see that as a critical step to helping to improve the impact and outcomes for the youngest children in our community. In terms of the type of contract or grant that we have currently with the county, that was set up in 2016 under, UMA's leadership, and it was really seen as critical to be able to. And I know Councilmember Glass, you referred to this today. It's really important to front load systems so that business can move forward. And so the way our grant was set up was, yes, we were given the funds at the beginning of the year and then we spend them down. And it's unclear to me why now, just as we're transitioning to this new entity, that needs to be any different. Because that's how our model has worked. And I think that's how it will continue to work. In terms of us transitioning to another fiscal agent or partner, I think right now that would make things even more complicated than they potentially need to be. We've been having conversations with both our steering committee and internally at the Community Foundation on how to make this transition happen. And if we were to transition to another fiscal agent before we were able to be independent, that means that all of those contracts would need to be rewritten 2 times instead of just one to get us to this new entity. And it would also mean transitioning my employment, Joy's employment, and would further complicate things. So I think there are a lot of things that still need to be clarified and negotiated, and conversations need to continue. But I think it's I would not suggest we switch to another fiscal agent at this time. I think that we can definitely talk about potentially some of the programs that we are funding transitioning to other organizations. But
well, Ms. Rusnak, if I I'm really glad you're here and help elevate some of those points. And rest assured, none of those decisions are being made today, right? We're just talking about some of the challenges that will be coming down the road when we all collect, as we continue these conversations. But I appreciate the perspective, understand it completely, and fully appreciate everything that you and your team have been doing. And so I'm good with where we are right now, recognizing we'll eyes wide open. We'll all hold hands in the future and walk down this path. But the themes that you have actually helped connect, Ms. Resnick, throughout this conversation about the front loading and about building upon what works, I fully agree with that philosophy, and we'll continue this conversation. And so I'm satisfied right now. I'll yield back to the President.
Great. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Just to be clear here, Ms. Yao, there we go. I know you could hear me. Just to be clear, the recommendation is to approve the level of funding. That's the action we are taking today, the 80,000 extra, right? And we're all in agreement on that. That's the rest of this will need to be worked out. I guess the open question is the budget language. And that is that what we need to do or not do? Your mic's not on.
Sorry.
Vivian. Yeah.
I think what the goal is that there needs to be some tweaking of the budget language, and that what council staff would recommend is that we can confer with the executive and bring back the exact language in the council packet. Things have just been moving, and we're trying to iron out a lot of different details as we're moving forward.
Sure. Okay. But bottom line is we like COF. We like the new entity. We want to do the funding. And I appreciate, Kim, Ms. Resnick, you saying being open to certain programs, for example, like if it makes sense for them to transition and be carried on by another entity like Collaboration Council or something. I think that's the way we need to approach this whole thing, right? It's like, we want things that are good to continue. How do we make that happen and do it with the least amount of mess and hassle as we get this new entity up and running? So good luck, Vivian and team, with that budget language, but but I think that so that sounds good to me. I mean, I just want to make sure we were clear on the funding. That's a yes from me, obviously, and I think everyone else, and then we'll come back to us with this after conferring a little more. Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Got it. So we have plan of action at least for the next few days. And then we'll continue to work as we have been with Ms. Kimberly and the team on potential solutions.
Okay, the next item in the packet is Head Start and pre-kindergarten. There's a status update. The table in your packet shows the various types of early childhood programming and seats available. Including Head Start full day, Head Start part day, pre-K full day, pre-K part day through MCPS, community-based pre-K funded through the county, as well as pre-K expansion grants through the state, and then pre-K special education. So those things are listed in your packet. Because of the blueprint, the state has added $6.036 million to increase pre-kindergarten seats in the county. $2.706 million of those seats are targeted for community-based providers, but the funding that's going to MCPS will be increasing the number of full-day seats by 240. Council staff also understands that while the primary focus is on 4-year-olds, they are adding, a mixed 3-4s class as a result of this funding. So the one item, though, for the committee to make a recommendation is for the Head Start program, though. The executive is recommending $4,807,949 in 2 positions for Head Start in fiscal year 23, and it's a net increase of $276,010. Basically, there's a reduction in grant funding of $15,000, as well as $291,000 increase in multi-program adjustments. And council staff recommends approval of these items.
Without objection?
Okay, and the last item is an amendment to the child care renovation CIP project that came over in April. This, as the Joint Committee knows, is a level of effort project that provides for the renovation of childcare facilities and playgrounds in 22 county buildings to ensure compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and safety concerns. So the expenditure schedule on the last page of our packet shows the recommended 6-year total, which is an increase of $2 million to $51,923,000. That would be an increase of expenditures in fiscal years 23 by $1 million and $1 million in fiscal year 24. Because of increases in state aid for other projects in the CIP, it made capacity or room to increase in this instance this project. During review of the HHS CIP, the Joint Committee recommended approval of the proposed expenditures in this project, subject to availability at reconciliation. Part of the reason behind that is that we know that the estimates in this particular project are very broad estimates, and we won't really know what exactly is needed until more design funding happens. So council staff recommends a consistent approach with this amendment is recommend approval subject to funds at reconciliation.
Don't see any questions or comments from colleagues. You'd head shaking, so without objection.
Okay, and that's it.
Mr. President?
Councilmember Jawando.
Just a question about the deleted item. When are we coming back to? I might have missed the email, the school-based services. What's the plan for that?
Oh, sorry, we completed that discussion on the 22nd, so it just was showing.
Oh, okay.
It was just carried forward.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. So we are done. All right. So thank you all very much. With that, we are adjourned.